Spotlights up and the curtains lifted. We're diving deep, Broadway unscripted. Experts and fans, a table united. Opinions clash, but all are invited.
In our very first Broadway unscripted roundtable today, we are asking, is Broadway pricing out the very audiences that support it? The Broadway League just released its 2024-25 demographic report, and the numbers tell a story producers may not want to hear. For 3 decades, Broadway depended on suburban audiences driving in from the outer boroughs, New Jersey, Westchester, Long Island, Connecticut, the Bridge and Tunnel crowd, we call it. That era seems to be over. Suburban attendance has collapsed to under 13%, and it is a 30-year low. So who's filling those seats now? Well, according to the numbers, tourists, millionaires, and a shrinking circle of superfans willing to pay upwards of $200 and, as we've seen, a lot more. Well, today we are asking, is Broadway pricing out the very audiences that support it? So here with the numbers and what they really mean, our inaugural guests and good friends, Pacheco, a theater journalist, host of Theater All Moving Parts on CUNY TV. He's a writer as well as an author. Patrick has been covering Broadway's business and cultural shifts for 3 long decades, and I worked with him some of those decades proudly. Stephen Suskin is a theater critic, author of 17 books, among them The Sound of Broadway Music and Second Act Trouble, and one of the sharpest analysts of Broadway's financial realities. Stephen and I, full disclosure, are both critics for the very dynamic theater website, New York Stage Review. And we welcome Alexander Robertson. When I say your name, Alex, I want to sing Alexander Robertson.
That's actually how I introduce myself. Hi, I'm Alexander Robertson.
He has a ring. You are the future of Broadway, Alex. He is a young phenom producer with a bunch of credits already to his name. I think 10 Broadway, 6 off Broadway. And He is only at the tender age of 27. So all of you, I appreciate you logging in and joining us. All right, that was a long introduction. There were some very interesting numbers in that report, and we all know that Broadway is not a terribly affordable art form. There's that word, affordable. But when you see $276,000 is the average household income for theater goers to Broadway, what, Patrick, does that say about the industry and its viability? And does that even surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me because it is, quote unquote, said to be an quote unquote elitist form, unquote. That said, I think the statistics also showed that the average age was 41, which of course isn't 70 or 65. And there are some good stuff as well among the statistics. What strikes me is that people have been saying that Broadway is dying or dead for as long as I've been covering, and it's been more than 3 decades. It's probably been more like 5 decades. Richie, in a chorus line, says, I want people to stop talking that Broadway is dead because I just got here. So I think there are some dire problems, and yes, they are financial, but there are some solutions, and I think those will be provided by Alex and other producers like him. And I think you can't look at the statistics through rose-colored glasses, but you can look at them through clear-eyed glasses and see that, yes, there is a future to Broadway, but there are some problems to surmount.
So, on the surface, it sounds like good news. We have that graph that we put up, the graphic, the 14.7 million people attending Broadway shows, which is the second highest. So people are going and they're willing to pay those prices. The total grosses reached an all-time high, $1.89 billion. And we also see that it's the super fans, and those are the diehard fans. They make up 8% of the audience, but these are people seeing 15 or more shows a year, but they account for 40% of the ticket sales. So let me ask you, Alex, do these numbers scare you at all? Because you're going to have to really rely on those diehard fans to attend your shows. And, as we saw in another graph, we're losing suburban audiences, which you folks in the producer ranks have been counting on.
Of course, yeah. I think every year that a report like this comes out, it's very easy to go, oh, things are changing. It's not the same. We're losing people. And I actually see it as an opportunity to look around and see who is presently attending our theaters and strategize how we can continue to elevate the offerings for those people, but offer things for other groups that are not represented in these numbers. It is true that the trends have seen sort of a lack of the suburban audience over this last year. I think there are a lot of things that contribute to those types of trends that aren't just due to Broadway specifically. But that also has given us such a great opportunity to look at audience development in new places. It's so interesting talking to several consumers in the market of uh, asking them what gets them to a Broadway show. What is their awareness of what is out there that they can attend? And a lot of times, I keep hearing this over and over that folks have a hard time choosing what to see because these tickets are a decent price for a lot of folks. And when you're deciding to go see a show and you have a family of four, you're going to take a lot into consideration and you don't want to take the risk on potentially seeing something that's not entertaining or enjoyable. So there are a lot of factors that go into where we are in the market, but I say lean into the change. And if it means that we now have to cater to an audience that is expected to come back over and over, which I love, if you've seen a show and you love it enough to attend over and over again, seeing a different cast member or a different part of the show, maybe, I think that's exciting. And I think we should lean into finding ways how we can continue to get folks to come back in a theater. Because a lot of folks will probably only see a show once. So, how do we incentivize them to come back and have something new to discover or experience with their friends or their family or their coworkers?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I think there was another piece of data that they uncovered in that Broadway League report was that I think the average audience for Broadway sees now maybe 5 shows a year. And that's an increase from, I think it was 4 shows a year last year. Things have changed, obviously. And Stephen, I want to put this one to you because you've been around a while. You've observed the Broadway culture and the Broadway scene, and we're discovering there are fewer musicals being produced, and producers are telling us one of the main reasons is that they cannot afford to pay these exorbitant costs to mount a production. And perfect example, Queen of Versailles, starring Kristen Chenoweth with music by Stephen Schwartz. It was supposed to be a mega hit. Instead, it became a colossal flop. And producers announced it is closing even sooner, just recently, by 2 weeks. They moved up the closing date than originally planned. And I'm just going to read to you a quote from the producers when they announced that it was folding earlier. They said, unfortunately, the harsh economic realities of new Broadway musicals in a post-COVID landscape have caught up with us. The industry as a whole is no longer seeing the audience behaviors we've relied on to shape our strategies for decades. And this has led us to the painful decision to move our closing earlier to Sunday, December 21st. So, Stephen, let me ask you a question. 20 years ago, would a show like The Queen of Versailles survived?
No.
What's changed?
First of all, it needs to be a good show. Now, there have been a lot of good shows that have not succeeded financially, which is part of what we're discussing. But then there are other shows which just don't work. You had Queen of Versailles, you had Tammy Faye last year, very similar. Part of the problem, I believe, comes from this wonderful thing we have called premium pricing. A hit musical can do $2 million a week or more. So once shows started grossing 2 million or even 3 million on good weeks, the other shows coming along seem to have budgeted themselves on the assumption that, well, if we do $2 million a week will make a lot of money. The fact is, it's only the massive successes, the Hamiltons, the Wickeds. They're the only ones who really can gross 2 million and upward. And other shows, which are good shows and enjoyable shows, and which audiences like, they might sell out. They might sell at 1.5 million. Now, they can still make money at 1.5 million, but if they're planning on making the sort of money you make at 2 million or 3 million, you're never gonna. You can't do that. So the budgets have become incredibly high and unrealistic. Now, it's not like people are saying, "Oh yeah, let's just spend money because why not? It's someone else's money." They spend the minimum that they feel is necessary to do the show properly. But that figure has become higher and higher. To produce musicals for $15 million is kind of ridiculous. And 15 million you can't even do anymore. Now it's come to 20 million, 25 million.
20,
Uh, you
26?
know,
Yeah.
26. And another part of the problems with the grosses is that in the theater you have gross, which could be every ticket you sell, and then you have what's called the net gross, where they take off the pension and welfare receipts, they take off the credit cards, they take off all these deductions. Now, about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I think after the pandemic, uh, it was decided by whoever decided these things. Well, we're going to use the gross figures to show how much money we're doing every week. So if you're grossing that 2 million or the 1.5 million, let's say, which we say 1.5 million might be good for a show that's not a blockbuster, but you don't get paid 1.5 million because money comes off of that. So the actual gross is probably 1.2 million, 1.25 million maybe, or 1.2 million, right? Even
Mhm.
though you're saying in the newspaper prints it's 1.5 million. So if you lose $300,000 of that for the credit cards and for the pension and welfare and for the various legitimate charges, you're not really getting 1.5 million a week.
Right.
You're getting a
Right.
million too, and then the theater gets their cut of that. So the show itself, Alexander, you're producing, and I think you've looked at the statements and you see the gross on a particular week, and then you see the company share, and then you go down to the bottom and you see the costs and you see the profit. And that profit doesn't really relate to the 1.5 million gross. It's hard to recover $20 million when you're not profiting, 500,000 a week.
I think, Stephen, I think you're pointing to figures that account for the most alarming part of many of the figures that have been thrown at us, and that is that it used to be that 20% of musicals recouped their investment. It's now 10%. The optimistic part about it, and that's one of the things that you mentioned, Roma, and Alex referred to as well, is that I was surprised that the number was 5.4 on average. Uh, the theater going audience sees 5.4 shows per year. I was surprised at that. They're not paying premium tickets, at least unless you're very, very rich. They're finding ways to get discount tickets, especially if they're seeing it again and again and again.
Yeah. Well, Alex, let me throw this to you because, as Patrick just pointed out, only 10% of shows are recouping these days. And I think we all know it's a risky proposition to invest in a Broadway show, but 10%, does that make it difficult for you to find investors? Because, unless they want to be like in the producers and, they're willing to lose money as a tax loss. Why would anybody want to invest in a Broadway show if the odds are so great that they're not going to make their money back?
Yeah, any startup is risky. Any business is risky. So that number on Broadway has never scared me. And I want to point out that that metric refers to a show recouping on Broadway. It doesn't refer to the lifetime of that creative work. So when people talk about a show failing or a show not recouping, I don't necessarily think that is the best measure to look at the lifetime performance of what a show could be. I love to bring up the example of The Addams Family, which financially was not successful when it was on Broadway, but after 10 years became one of the number one licensed shows for high schoolers. And that show ultimately turned a profit for its investors and producers. So when I am pitching out any sort of project, whether that's on Broadway or off Broadway or on tour, um, we always, of course, inform anyone of the risk. However, there are several reasons why someone would want to give to the arts or get involved, whether that is for vanity reasons or to try to make some money potentially. There's so many different ways in which people find themselves contributing. But I will say that when we're identifying what makes a property successful and potentially a breadwinner, we have to look at what is its lifetime cycle, which spans more than just a couple of years or months it could play on Broadway. So many shows that we've seen this year, who knows, in 10 to 20 years might actually be the number one hit. It just needs a
Okay.
little more time.
Excellent point. There, because there is viability, even if it's closed prematurely. I want a snapshot response here to this question. Broadway is way too expensive for the average American. Most people do not have a household income of $276,000. What can we do to make it more affordable for theater fans to see a Broadway show? How about Stephen? You? What do
Well,
you?
it's an easy question to answer. The answer being nothing we can do, I think, for many reasons. Lower your ticket prices, and that means there's less money coming in. That means the theater, which you need to get the theater owner to license it, let you have a theater. When you say to him, "Oh, we're going to lower the prices," means you're going to get less money in his ticket income. uh, the various union rates are all predicated. They go into negotiations and they say, well, you're now getting, $100 a ticket, $500 a ticket. You're getting premium tickets of $2,000 a ticket. So why should we be working for what we worked for 5 years ago? So once those things go up, they're not going to go down. Because the costs do go up, even if the costs stayed the same, but costs for everything
Are
go up.
going up. I
So
know.
how do you lower
I
the
know.
ticket prices?
People just have to be really clever in finding a lower price of tickets. And there's any number of programs, whether it's TDF or any other ones, that throw out getting people asses in seats. And there was a record number, I think, of asses in seats in the last season. So people are coming. And I don't know, and Alex might be able to address this, is a new business model possible? And
Please.
secondly, can the infrastructure change in order to accommodate a less costly production, whether those are immersive productions like a Kaylee that might be coming in and other, the immersive Phantom, I don't know that it's any cheaper, but can the infrastructure change?
Mm.
I don't know the answer
Alex,
to that.
Alex,
Yeah,
can the
I
infrastructure
want to
change?
alleviate the myth that Broadway is unaffordable. It's actually untrue. Maybe we have a higher average ticket price, but for most consumers, whether you're low income or high income, there is a Broadway ticket that could be at your level. Um, uh, People can see shows as low as $30, sometimes $40. And I know there are other things that these people are spending money on that are far more expensive and less of an experience. So I will say that Broadway has many different ways that you can access it at a price point that works for you. I will say, in terms of how we navigate the current landscape of getting more folks in there who maybe haven't been in there, um, there have been different programs and initiatives that we've been employing to try to diversify our audiences and bring in folks who are not necessarily always reflected in our seats. So there is change coming, but when we talk about Broadway, as Patrick explained, it's about finding the best way to find the best price for you. It's not impossible. It's just not necessarily obvious, as it is with any product you're buying.
Statistics was that 34% of the audience were BIPOC. which is a record number for the season, last season.
Patrick, very good point, and we neglected to mention that because that's really good news. But let's spell it out. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color, right? Non-white traditional audiences, and I think that's a terrific piece of news to be able to report, because that is a 30-year high as well. So non-traditional Broadway audiences are seeming to be more interested and able to attend a Broadway show, which is a really positive news. But
there's a fun fact that the average price of a Broadway ticket, I suppose, is always, throughout the decades, has always been 10 times the price of a movie ticket.
I think it's more now, but now it used to be. Well, when you start, I had looked up some figures. Something like Gypsy and the original, it was a $9 ticket.
Yeah. When I arrived, Chorus Line was the top ticket when I arrived in New York was
That's
15.
15, right?
Mm-hmm.
and you know
yeah,
what? My mom did a segment on one of the shows she was working on. I'll never forget. She said, "Can you believe the act starring Liza Minnelli? They're asking $25 a ticket. Can you believe it?" And she's never even in the show. Remember, she was always out sick for one reason or another. So it was the understudy. $25. Yeah, right.
But I wanted to share this with you because I think you would find it interesting. In real time, the larger conversation of what I think they were saying with that statement for Queen of Versailles, about the current state of the economic pressures, they're not referring or taking ownership for the content of what they're presenting. What they are referring to is their ability to project how long they can continue to run a show. So the audience trend of people buying tickets 6 to 8 months previous to the pandemic was how we were able to calculate that a show could run. Okay, like let's say it's December, we know, okay, I can make it to January, I can make it to end of February. Now in real time, across the board, it's looking like over 50% of the grosses, like for these shows, are happening in the same week, which is very scary because it means we can't in real time predict the whether that audience will show up that week or not. So that is where we're at. That is a very scary pain point that it isn't really being publicly talked about. It's just I know this because I'm in these rooms and these meetings every day, but that's what's actually happening. It's that the audience habits have changed extremely, and we have to figure out a new way to be able to continue to run our shows and project them without knowing what the months ahead will look like for us. So that's
How do
like
you account that? How do you changing audience habits?
I think we have to inform people that Broadway is a luxury and that it's not going to just necessarily be there just because they show up in New York. But that seems to be the expectation is people just are assuming, oh, I'm in New York, I can buy a ticket the day of. Whereas before, these shows would be sold out. We would know who's going to be here. People plan trips. But this is not just a Broadway issue, it's a consumer buying habit. It's that people are buying closer to the dates of their attendance. And now we can't predict whether we're gonna have the show running in February when they decide to come, or March when they're planning their trip, because they're not buying in advance.
That is
Interesting.
scary. It really
Yeah,
is. I mean, that's really a massive change in the theater buying habits, or the theater goers buying habit. There's no advance.
Well,
exactly.
going back many years, you always had shows which were hits, which would indeed be sold out in advance. But then you always had shows which, a Monday you didn't know what was going to be coming in.
That point that Alex made is salient. That the only thing is you can't deny that the Queen of Versailles got mixed to negative reviews, and if most people are making their determination what to see based on word of mouth. I don't know what people are saying walking out of the theater, but I mean obviously that contributed to its early closing, don't you think? I mean, there's no denying quality will sell a ticket, although
It's
Yep.
Well, it's
maybe
always
also if you produce shows that people want to
yeah.
see, you can announce a show and it might not turn out not to be good. If people say that sounds like something I want to see, they will go and see it. If you remember, Wicked got bad reviews.
Yeah.
Wicked got bad reviews, but it seems like the audiences went and loved it, and it's a big hit. Les
Yeah.
Mis did not get good reviews. There are shows which, if people want to see them, and if people then go and are pleased with what they see and enjoy them, that's what makes the show a hit. Now, a show like Queen of Versailles, I I don't think it was a very good show, and I don't think it's a show that people wanted to see. So
Yeah.
if you start with that, even if it turns out to be good, I think that Dead Outlaw last year was actually a very good show, but it was not a
Yes.
show that people thought, oh, that really sounds like something I want to see. So it was a battle. Once they heard from people, oh yeah, it's really good, they still had trouble. So it's
Mm.
a combination of all those things. And in terms of the low ticket prices, you're right. There are ways to see almost everything for low ticket prices. But the problem is that, if you can gross reliably 1.5 million for a hit show, right? And if you sell half those tickets at half price, then you're not grossing 1.5 million. You're grossing 900 or 750 or 800. And unfortunately, the costs are such that you can't survive at 800. So it's fine to sell the tickets at the low price. We've learned over the years, the tickets in the top of the balcony are always less, but they don't sell. There have been many, there was a time when the orchestra tickets cost more than the mezzanine and more than the balcony. And in, I think, the 80s, I think Hal Prince decided, you know what, I'm going to make the front mezzanine the same price as the orchestra tickets. And people
And they
said, well,
sold.
how can you do it? It's upstairs. And as you know, those tickets sold out immediately,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
even though now that they were the high price, when they were lower, they didn't. And that's
Yeah.
always been a problem.
It
Yeah.
always comes down to word of mouth, though. Word of mouth, not necessarily from the critics. The critics seem to have lost power in many respects. But it's word of mouth.
Very true. Which
Uh,
is
I'm going to cut this off because we've been going quite a while. So, gentlemen, Stephen Suskin, Patrick Pacheco, and Alexander Robertson, thank you all so much for your insights and your expertise. And thank you out there for joining us for our very first Broadway Unscripted conversation. Our next live roundtable topic: critics on critics. That's coming up. Maybe Stephen will join us again. And in future episodes, we're going to investigate all the alternative ways that people can get tickets at a more affordable price. Be sure to follow us, and you can get us at on social media at Fifth Row Center. And fifth is a number 5. It's not the word spelled out, at Fifth Row Center. And if you want to log on to our website, it's a little bit different. It is fifthrow.center. See you guys next time.
thank you.
Thank you.